Most people think Queen Victoria fell in love with Prince Albert because he was royal. Wrong. When 17-year-old Princess Victoria met Albert at her birthday party in 1836, she ignored his royal bloodline completely. Instead, she became obsessed with something totally ordinary, his teeth. That night in her private diary, this future queen wrote about Albert's sweet mouth with fine teeth, not his political connections. His smile, and that weird, wonderful detail would spark a love story that changed monarchy forever. But here's what nobody tells you about their first meeting. Welcome to Hearts and History. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Get comfortable, maybe grab some tea, dim those lights. If this helps you unwind, hit subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global community gather for these bedtime stories. Tonight we're diving into Victoria and Albert's real love story, starting with that first magical awkward meeting in 1836. Ready? Let's go back to Kensington Palace, under the shadow of a crown. April 1836, Kensington Palace. Princess Victoria is turning 17, and the party preparations are intense. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across marble floors, musicians tuning instruments, servants arranging flowers. Victoria herself is practically vibrating with excitement. For a girl who spent her entire life under strict supervision, never allowed friends her own age, tonight feels like freedom. She has no idea that across Europe her uncle Leopold is orchestrating something that will change everything. 2 young German princes are already travelling toward London. Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha steps out of his carriage at Kensington Palace, and honestly, he looks nervous. He's 17, same age as Victoria, but this English court thing is completely foreign to him. His territory back home is so small that most people can't even find it on a map. Meanwhile, Victoria is preparing in her chambers, completely unaware that Uncle Leopold has matchmaking plans. She's just excited about dancing, about wearing her new dress, about finally having a party that's actually fun. The moment Victoria meets Albert, something shifts. She'll write about it later, but right now she's just staring. He's got these incredible blue eyes, blonde hair, and when he smiles, those teeth. Perfect white, gorgeous teeth. In 1836, dental hygiene was basically optional for most people. Rotten teeth were normal, even for royalty. But Albert's smile is radiant, and Victoria is absolutely mesmerized, not by his royal title, not by political advantages, just by this boy who looks kind and has a beautiful smile. The dancing begins, and Victoria comes alive. She's spent years trapped under the Kensington system, this oppressive control where she can't even walk downstairs alone. But tonight, spinning across the ballroom floor with Albert, she feels free. They dance multiple times, way more than protocol usually allows. Victoria is laughing, genuinely happy. Albert keeps up admirably, though he's clearly not used to these late English court hours. Back in Germany, people actually sleep at reasonable times. Who knew? But he's trying, and Victoria notices everything. By the third dance, Albert is struggling. English court life runs late, and this boy is used to early bedtimes and quiet evenings. He keeps trying to hide little yawns, but Victoria catches them. She finds it charming rather than offensive. Here's someone who isn't performing for her, isn't trying to impress her with elaborate schemes. He's just tired, human, real. While other nobles are calculating political advantages, Albert is fighting sleep. For Victoria, raised among people who want something from her, this honesty is revolutionary. The evening wind down, and Albert practically stumbles to his chambers. Court protocol, late dinners, formal conversations. It's exhausting for someone raised in quiet German countryside. Meanwhile, Victoria is energized. She dismisses her ladies-in-waiting quickly, eager to be alone with her thoughts. Grabbing her diary, she sits at her writing desk and begins cataloguing every detail of the evening. This is where we get the real Victoria, unfiltered, writing by candlelight about a boy who made her heart race. Victoria's diary entry that night is pure 17-year-old girl magic. Albert is extremely handsome. His hair is about the same colour as mine, his eyes are large and blue, and he has a beautiful nose and a very sweet mouth with fine teeth. Fine teeth. She's completely smitten, and it shows in every word. But then comes the practical Victoria. Though all the family and everyone say that Albert and I are to be married, I don't think it at all likely, for I am not ready. Here's what makes Victoria extraordinary. She's attracted to Albert, clearly enchanted by him. But she's also realistic about her future. Marriage would mean giving up independence. She's barely tasted. She's third in line to the throne, might become queen someday, and she understands that royal marriage is political transaction, not romance novel. So she writes honestly. She likes Albert enormously, but marriage is for the distant future, if ever. She's 17, she wants to live first, smart girl. As Albert and his brother prepare to leave England, Victoria feels genuinely sad. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to get attached. But something about Albert's gentle nature, his awkwardness at court, those perfect teeth and kind eyes, it's gotten under her skin. She waves goodbye from her window, watching their carriage disappear down the palace drive. In her diary that night, she admits she'll miss him, just miss him. Nothing about marriage or politics or royal alliances, just a girl missing a boy who made her laugh. The Sovereign Solitude. June 20th, 1837. 6 in the morning. Kensington Palace. Victoria's still asleep when they wake her. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain are standing by her bed in formal dress. She's 18 years old, barely awake, and they're telling her King William IV is dead. She's queen now, right now, this second. She writes in her journal later that day, just 3 words. I am queen. That's it. No excitement, no fear, no grand proclamations. Just the simple, stunning reality of it all. Here's what happens next, and this part blew my mind when I first read about it. Victoria's first official act as Queen of the British Empire. She asks to be alone, for 1 hour. Think about that. This girl has never been alone in her entire life. She slept in her mother's bedroom every single night. Someone holds her hand walking downstairs, and now, as the most powerful monarch on earth, the very first thing she does is ask everyone to leave her alone. That hour of solitude wasn't just about being alone. It was revolution disguised as a simple request. For 18 years, every decision had been made for her. What to wear, who to talk to, where to go. The Kensington system, they called it. Basically prison with better furniture. But now, she's queen. Nobody can tell her what to do. That hour alone was Victoria testing her new power and discovering what freedom actually felt like. Imagine that first breath of independence. 3 weeks later, Victoria makes another historic move. She packs up and leaves Kensington Palace for Buckingham Palace. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. She's the first British monarch to actually live there. George IV built it. William IV hated it, called it too expensive. But Victoria, she sees possibility, bigger rooms, distance from her controlling mother, space to figure out who she is as queen. Buckingham Palace becomes her symbol of independence. A fresh start in every sense. But here's what nobody prepared her for. The loneliness. Victoria quickly discovers that being queen means being fundamentally alone. Everyone bows. Everyone calls her Your Majesty. Everyone waits for her to speak first. She's the most important person in the room, always, which means she's also the most isolated. Think about it. When you're queen, nobody's really your friend anymore. They're your subjects. Even conversations become performances. Every word weighed and measured. The title creates this invisible wall around her. People she'd laughed with as Princess Victoria suddenly become formal, distant. They're scared of saying the wrong thing, of being too familiar. Victoria writes about missing simple human connection, missing people treating her like a person. Instead of bowing and scraping, she wants someone to argue with her, tease her, treat her normally. But that's impossible now. The crown changes everything. Every day brings endless protocol. Who walks in what order? Who sits where? Who speaks when? Victoria's drowning in ceremony that feels meaningless. She wants to be a good queen, but she also wants to feel alive. The palace is full of people, but empty of real connection. She's 18, she has normal 18-year-old needs for friendship, for fun, for someone to understand her. But queens don't get to be normal teenagers. The crown doesn't allow it. And then everyone starts asking the question that drives her crazy. When will she marry? Parliament wants to know. Her advisors want to know. The newspapers speculate constantly. They present eligible princes like items on a menu. Victoria's response: not interested. She's finally free from her mother's control. Why would she immediately hand that freedom to a husband? Marriage means sharing power, and she's just discovered what having power feels like. She's not ready to give it up. The pressure intensifies. Royal marriages are political alliances, they remind her. She needs an heir, they insist. But Victoria pushes back hard. She calls potential suitors from other countries heavy, dull, and frightened, in letters to Uncle Leopold. She's savage about it, and honestly, good for her. This is her life, her crown, her choice. For the first time ever, Victoria has agency. She's not giving it up easily, no matter who's pressuring her. But slowly, something shifts. The loneliness starts outweighing the independence. Victoria realizes she can be queen and still crave partnership. Maybe marriage doesn't have to mean losing power. Maybe it could mean sharing it with someone who understands the burden. She starts thinking differently about companionship, not as a threat to her authority, but as a solution to her isolation. Someone who could be both subject and partner, equal and loyal. October 1839, 3 years into her reign. Victoria makes a declaration that surprises everyone, including herself. She tells her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, that she's reconsidering marriage, not because Parliament demands it, not for political alliance, because she wants it. She wants someone to share this impossible job with, someone who sees Victoria the person, not just the crown. And there's one name that keeps coming to mind, someone she met years ago at a birthday party. The return of a prince. October 1839. 3 years have passed since that birthday party where Victoria first noticed Albert's teeth. She's been queen for 2 years now, resisting every marriage proposal, enjoying her independence. But Uncle Leopold keeps writing letters. Just invite Albert for a visit, he suggests. Pure courtesy, nothing more. Victoria finally agrees, probably rolling her eyes. She's 20 now, confident, powerful. What harm could one visit possibly do? She has absolutely no idea she's about to meet a completely different person. Albert steps off the carriage on October 10th, and Victoria's world completely tilts. This isn't the awkward teenager who kept falling asleep at those endless parties 3 years ago. University education, travels through Italy, intensive studies in law and philosophy, he's transformed into something absolutely extraordinary. Victoria writes in her diary that night, "It was with some emotion that I beheld Albert, who is beautiful, not handsome this time, beautiful." She catalogues every detail like she's seeing him for the very first time, because honestly she is. The changes are everywhere she looks. His shoulders are broader now, his waist more defined. Those delicate mustachios she'd noticed before, now perfectly groomed. But it's not just physical. Albert carries himself differently. There's confidence where there used to be uncertainty, intelligence where there used to be boyish charm. He's become a man. And Victoria, who'd spent 3 years convincing herself she wasn't interested in marriage, suddenly finds herself completely fascinated. This is not good. Or maybe it's perfect. She honestly can't tell which. They spend the next few days together, and everything feels different. When they sit down at the piano for duets, their hands brush over the keys. Small moments that probably mean nothing, except Victoria's pulse quickens every single time. Albert plays beautifully now. His technique has improved dramatically. They move through Mozart, Beethoven, creating something together that sounds like partnership, like harmony. Victoria catches herself watching his fingers instead of reading the music. This is becoming a problem. A wonderful, terrifying, completely unexpected problem that she doesn't want to solve. But it's their conversations that really seal her fate. Albert doesn't just make polite royal small talk anymore. He has opinions, strong ones, about politics, about social reform, about what government should actually do for people. Victoria finds herself genuinely challenged for the first time in years. He disagrees with her sometimes. Respectfully, intelligently, but he disagrees. Nobody disagrees with the Queen. Except Albert does, and somehow that makes everything he says more interesting, more real. She's not just talking to a potential husband. She's talking to an intellectual equal. That's incredibly attractive. Victoria starts looking forward to their daily walks through the palace gardens. Albert points out architectural details she'd never noticed. He talks about art, about science, about innovations he's seen during his travels. His mind works differently now. It's more curious, more engaged with the world. And he listens to her too. Really listens. When Victoria shares her thoughts about governing, about the pressures of queenship, Albert doesn't just nod politely. He asks follow-up questions. He wants to understand her world. That kind of attention is intoxicating, dangerous, absolutely irresistible. By October 14th, just 4 days after Albert arrived, Victoria's resolve completely crumbles. She tells Lord Melbourne, her Prime Minister, "My mind is made up about marrying dearest Albert." 4 days. That's all it took for 3 years of careful independence to dissolve. Melbourne probably isn't surprised. He's been watching Victoria during Albert's visit, seeing how she lights up whenever Albert enters a room, how she laughs differently when he's around, how she touches her hair when they're talking. The signs have been obvious to everyone except Victoria herself. Until now. But there's a complication nobody talks about in the fairy tale versions. Queens don't get proposed to. Under British royal protocol, nobody can propose to a reigning monarch. If Victoria wants Albert, she has to ask him herself. Break centuries of tradition where men propose to women. Risk the humiliation of rejection. Risk Albert saying no thank you. I'd rather not marry the most powerful woman in the world. It's terrifying and revolutionary and completely against everything she's been taught about how these things work. But love makes you brave, or stupid. Sometimes both. On October 15th, Victoria summons Albert to her private room. Her hands are shaking. She's conquered parliaments and prime ministers, but asking the man she loves to marry her. That's different. That's personal. That's vulnerable in a way that queenship never prepared her for. She later writes exactly what happened. "I told him it would make me too happy if he would consent to what I wished, to marry me." Simple words, life-changing words. She's just proposed marriage, and now she has to wait for his answer. The silence probably lasts forever. Albert says yes. Of course he says yes. But the way Victoria describes it makes everything real. "We embraced each other over and over again, and he was so kind, so affectionate." You can feel her relief, her joy, her disbelief that this is actually happening. The boy she noticed at her birthday party 3 years ago has become the man she wants to spend her life with, and he wants her too. Not because she's queen, not because of political advantage, because of who she is when they're alone together, playing piano and talking about the future. In 5 days, Victoria's entire future has changed. She arrived at this reunion thinking she'd entertain Albert out of courtesy, maybe enjoy some pleasant conversation before he left again. Instead, she's engaged. She's chosen her partner for life. The transformation isn't just Albert's. Victoria has discovered something about herself too, that independence she'd guarded so carefully. It's more powerful when shared with the right person, someone who challenges her, respects her, loves her for exactly who she is, someone whose teeth she still finds absolutely beautiful. Some things never change. The Queen proposes. October 15th, 1839, Victoria paced her private sitting room at Windsor Castle. 4 days since Albert arrived, and she knew the problem. Queens don't get proposed to. Nobody can ask a reigning monarch to marry them. It's literally against protocol. So Victoria would have to break 500 years of tradition and ask Albert herself. Think about that pressure. She's 20 years old, ruling the most powerful empire on earth, and she has to propose to a man. Her hands were shaking. She summoned Albert at 12:30. He walked in expecting another pleasant conversation about music or politics. Instead, Victoria took his hands and said the words that would change everything. "It would make me too happy if you would consent to what I wished, to marry me." Albert didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately, kissed her hands, and they embraced over and over. Victoria wrote that night that she felt the happiest of human beings. For exactly 24 hours, she was right. Albert's response was everything Victoria hoped for. He told her he'd loved her since their first meeting 3 years earlier, that he'd spent university thinking about her, wondering if she remembered him. He accepted not just marriage, but everything that came with it, being forever in her shadow, giving up any independent political power, moving to a foreign country where half the nobles already resented him. Albert chose Victoria, knowing exactly what he was sacrificing. That's the kind of man he was. They spent the evening planning their future. Victoria wanted a quick wedding, maybe Christmas. Albert suggested spring, thinking practically about arrangements. They talked about children, about how they'd rule together, about transforming the monarchy. For one magical evening, it felt simple. 2 people in love, making plans. But Victoria had to tell her ministers. And that's when the fairy tale collided with brutal political reality, because Parliament was about to make Albert pay for being foreign, German, and Catholic raised. Prime Minister Lord Melbourne heard the news with barely concealed horror, not because he disliked Albert personally, but because he knew what was coming. The Tories would attack, the press would savage them, anti-German sentiment was already rising, and here's Victoria marrying another German prince. Melbourne warned Victoria that Parliament would make things difficult. She brushed off his concerns. Big mistake. She had no idea how vicious British politics could get when they smelled weakness. Parliament's first attack was financial. Royal precedent gave prince consorts £50,000 annually. Parliament offered Albert £30,000. A deliberate insult designed to show he was lesser, unwanted, not worth full support. Victoria fought furiously, arguing in letters, pleading with ministers. She lost completely. The vote wasn't even close. 30,000 it was. Albert learned his monetary worth to Britain, £20,000 less than previous German princes. The message was crystal clear. Worse came next. Victoria asked Parliament to make Albert King consort. Seems reasonable, right? Wrong. Parliament refused entirely. Their reasoning? Technically, King outranks Queen. Making Albert King would theoretically put a German prince above Britain's rightful monarch. So Albert got nothing. No royal title beyond prince. Not even prince consort until 17 years later. He'd marry the Queen of the British Empire and remain essentially titleless. The humiliation was intentional and absolute. The press joined the attack gleefully. Cartoons depicted Albert as a fortune hunter. Articles questioned his loyalty, his religion, his intelligence. They called him the pauper prince because his family had no real money. Some newspapers suggested Victoria was being manipulated by foreign interests. The cruelest attacks focused on his looks, calling him too pretty, too soft for British royalty. Albert read every word. Victoria tried hiding the papers from him. Too late. He knew exactly how unwelcome he was. Here's what gets me about Albert's character. He could have walked away, gone back to Germany, married some nice German princess, lived quietly with respect and dignity. Instead, he stayed, wrote to Victoria that he understood the challenges, but chose her anyway, that their love mattered more than titles or money or public approval. Albert was 20 years old, giving up everything familiar for a woman and a hostile country. That takes incredible courage. Victoria's response to Albert's treatment revealed her true character. She fought every slight, defended him publicly and privately. When courtiers whispered about Albert's influence, she promoted him visibly. When Parliament questioned his loyalty, she gave him real political responsibilities. Victoria spent her entire reign proving Albert's worth to people determined not to see it. She turned defending her husband into a decades-long political strategy. And honestly, she was magnificent at it. By Christmas 1839, Victoria and Albert had survived their engagement's baptism by fire. Parliament had shown its hostility. The press had revealed its cruelty. British society had made clear Albert would never be fully accepted, and they chose each other anyway. Their wedding was set for February 10th, 1840, against all odds, against political pressure, against public skepticism. Two 20-year-olds decided love was worth fighting for. Sometimes the simplest choices are the most revolutionary ones. The dress that stirred a tradition. February 1840. Victoria's sitting in her private chambers at Buckingham Palace, staring at fabric samples. Her dressmakers are horrified. For centuries, royal brides wore rich colours, deep reds, royal blues, anything that screamed wealth and power. But Victoria, she wants white, plain white satin. Her advisors think she's lost her mind. White was what servants wore, what poor brides chose, when they couldn't afford anything better. But here's what they didn't understand. Victoria wasn't just choosing a dress, she was making a statement. See, this wasn't about fashion, this was about love versus duty. Every single thing about royal weddings was designed to showcase power, wealth, political alliances. The dress, the ceremony, the guest list, it was all theatre. But Victoria looked at Albert and thought, I want to marry him as a woman, not as a queen. She wanted something pure, simple, honest. White wasn't boring to her. It was revolutionary. It said, I'm choosing love over tradition. And her dressmakers, they were absolutely losing their minds over this decision. The dress itself was stunning in its simplicity. White silk satin with a deep flounce of Honiton lace. No jewels encrusted everywhere. No heavy gold embroidery. Just elegant, beautiful, human. Victoria insisted on supporting British lace makers, so 200 women worked for months creating that Honiton lace. But the real beauty? She kept it. After the wedding, she had pieces of that lace sewn into the christening gowns of all her children. That dress wasn't just for one day. It became part of her family's story forever. Her diary entry, the morning of February 10th, 1840, tells you everything. Quote, I felt so happy when I awoke, yet I had a feeling of anxiety about me. Think about that. She's the Queen of England, about to marry the love of her life, and she's nervous like any other bride. She writes about Albert, sending her a beautiful bouquet of orange blossoms, not diamonds, not gold flowers. Simple, sweet, personal. This wasn't Queen Victoria the monarch. This was Vicky, a 20-year-old girl in love. The ceremony itself broke every rule in the book. First royal wedding held in broad daylight in over a century. Why? Because Victoria wanted her people involved. She wanted thousands lining the streets celebrating with them, not hidden away in some private chapel at midnight. She wrote, I want this to be a day of joy for everyone. And it was. From Buckingham Palace to St. James's Palace, the streets were packed. People climbed trees, hung from windows, cheering for their young queen who chose love. But here's my favourite part. As Victoria walked down the aisle, she looked up at Albert waiting at the altar and smiled. Not the formal, controlled expression of a monarch, a real smile, a bride's smile. And Albert? He smiled back. In that moment, all the protocol disappeared. It wasn't about empires or politics or alliances. It was just two people who'd found each other in this crazy world of royalty and power. That smile changed everything. It said, we're doing this together, as equals, as partners. The Archbishop of Canterbury performed the ceremony, but the words that mattered most came straight from Victoria's heart. She insisted on including obey in her vows, which shocked everyone. The Queen of England promising to obey her husband, but Victoria understood something her critics didn't. In their private life, she wanted to be Albert's wife first, Queen second. She was creating boundaries between her public power and her private love. Smart woman, she knew the difference between ruling an empire and building a marriage. That evening, Victoria wrote in her diary about their first dance as husband and wife. Quote, we danced until nearly 1 o'clock. Albert looked so beautiful in his uniform. Then she adds this incredibly human detail. My feet hurt terribly, but I didn't want the evening to end. The Queen of England with sore feet, not wanting her wedding day to be over. It's so perfectly normal, so relatable. This was what she'd been fighting for, the right to be human, even while wearing a crown. And that white dress? It started a revolution nobody saw coming. Within months, British magazines were featuring white wedding gowns. By the 1860s, it was the expected choice for brides across Britain and America. Victoria had accidentally created a tradition that would last centuries. Every white wedding dress worn today traces back to that February morning when a young queen decided love mattered more than royal protocol. She'd wanted to stay human, and she'd made humanity fashionable. The broader impact was enormous. Victoria and Albert's wedding showed the world that monarchy could be both powerful and personal. They'd proven you could rule an empire and still have a real marriage. The middle class looked at them and thought, these are our values: love, partnership, family. Royal approval of romantic marriage changed everything. Love became respectable, fashionable, aspirational. Victoria's white dress wasn't just about fashion. It was about the radical idea that even queens deserved to marry for love. That night, as thousands celebrated in the streets of London, Victoria and Albert were finally alone. She wrote her last diary entry as a single woman, the happiest day of my life. Albert is everything I could wish for. Simple words that launched a partnership destined to reshape monarchy forever. But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about history or legacy. She was just a woman who'd found her person, chosen love over convention, and somehow managed to stay human while wearing a crown. Mission accomplished. Reshaping the monarchy. February 1840. The honeymoon's over, but the real work's just beginning. Victoria and Albert aren't just married anymore. They're partners running an empire. And here's what nobody expected. They're about to completely reinvent what it means to be royal. Not through grand proclamations or political reforms, but through something far more radical. Christmas trees, family portraits, actually loving each other in public. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. They're about to turn the British monarchy from a distant, scandal-ridden institution into something the middle class actually wants to emulate. Those first months of marriage, pure chaos. Victoria's learning to share power for the first time in her life. Albert's figuring out how to be influential without technically having any authority. Parliament still won't give him a proper title. He's essentially the most powerful, powerless man in Britain. But watch what they do with this impossible situation. Instead of fighting the system, they're about to work around it. Albert becomes Victoria's private secretary, her closest advisor, her political partner. They're creating a new model, monarchy as teamwork. Two people, one crown, shared vision. Then Victoria gets pregnant. November 1840, Princess Vicky is born, and everything changes again. Victoria discovers she's actually good at being a mother, not the sentimental, cooing kind, the practical kind. She wants her children educated, useful, contributing to society. Albert designs their education personally. Languages, science, arts, politics. These royal children aren't just decorative. They're being trained as ambassadors for a new kind of monarchy, one that actually works for a living, one that earns respect through competence, not just birthright. Christmas 1840, Windsor Castle. Albert brings in a German tradition that's about to change everything. A decorated evergreen tree in the drawing room. Victoria thinks it's charming. The children are delighted. They invite the Illustrated London News to sketch the scene and accidentally create a cultural revolution. Within 5 years, every middle-class family in Britain wants a Christmas tree. It's not just decoration, it's aspiration. If it's good enough for the Queen, it's good enough for us. Victoria and Albert just turned a private family moment into a national tradition. But here's the genius move, those family portraits. Victoria and Albert commissioned dozens of paintings, sketches, photographs, showing them at home with their children, reading together, playing music, looking normal. For centuries, royal portraits showed power, wealth, distance. These showed domesticity, the Queen changing a diaper, Albert helping with homework, the royal family as an actual family. It's revolutionary marketing. They're selling monarchy by making it relatable. And it works. Public approval ratings soar. People see their own values reflected in their monarch's life. Their shared philosophy is simple but radical. Monarchy should serve the people, not the other way round. Albert writes to Victoria about their duty to set moral examples, to use their position for social good. They champion education, support the arts, promote industrial progress. The Great Exhibition of 1851. That's Albert's brainchild, showing the world that Britain leads in innovation, culture, progress. Not just military might or colonial wealth, actual contribution to human advancement. They're rebranding the entire concept of royal purpose, from ornamental to functional. Public perception shifts completely. Before Victoria and Albert, royalty meant scandal, excess, waste. Think George IV's mistresses and debt. Victoria's uncles were disasters. The monarchy was becoming irrelevant, possibly unsustainable. But look at the 1840s and 50s. Suddenly, being royal means being respectable, working hard, loving your spouse, educating your children, living within your means. The middle class sees monarchy reflecting their own aspirations, moral improvement, family values, social progress. Victoria and Albert make being royal something to admire, not resent. Their modern approach: accessibility without losing dignity. They hold regular audiences, respond to letters personally, visit factories and schools. Albert studies every government paper, advises Victoria on policy, essentially functions as an unofficial prime minister. But they're careful never to overstep constitutional boundaries. They influence through moral authority, not political pressure. It's a delicate balance, being involved without being controlling, being visible without being vulgar. They're professionalizing monarchy while keeping it personal, making it both efficient and warm. Domestic virtue becomes their political strategy. Every decision gets filtered through one question: does this set a good example? They reject expensive court ceremonies in favor of quiet family life. They avoid gambling, drinking, the aristocratic vices that made previous monarchs unpopular. Albert never has mistresses. Victoria never shows favoritism to flatterers. They work constantly, read government papers every night, take their duties seriously. Their private life becomes their public platform. Character as policy, morality as monarchy's selling point. By 1850, they've completely reformed the monarchy's face. Gone is the distant, dissolute, expensive royal family. In its place, hard-working, moral, family-focused leaders who happen to wear crowns. They've made monarchy compatible with middle-class values, democratic ideals, industrial progress. The Queen and Prince Consort aren't just rulers, they're role models. Their success lies in understanding that in a changing world, institutions must adapt or die. They chose adaptation. They chose relevance. They chose to make monarchy serve the age, not the other way around. The transformation is complete but fragile. Victoria and Albert have breathed new life into an ancient institution through love, work, and moral example. They've proven monarchy can be both traditional and progressive, powerful and humble, royal and relatable, but it all depends on them personally. Their characters, their partnership, their commitment to the vision they've created. What happens when that partnership ends? When Albert's gone and Victoria has to carry this reformed monarchy alone? That test is coming sooner than anyone knows, but for now they've saved the crown by reimagining it. The legacy lives on. Victoria and Albert had 9 children. 9, and every single one of them would reshape European history in ways their parents never imagined. There was Vicky, the eldest, brilliant and headstrong. Bertie, the future King Edward VII, who drove his parents crazy. Alice, sweet and compassionate. Alfred, the naval officer. Helena, the practical one. Louise, the artist. Arthur, the soldier. Leopold, fragile, with hemophilia. And Beatrice, the baby, who became Victoria's constant companion. These weren't just royal children. They were about to become Europe's most powerful matchmakers. Albert had a plan. Marry the children strategically across European royal houses. Create a web of family connections so strong that war would become impossible. Think about it. If every monarch was related, if cousins ruled neighbouring countries, surely they'd never turn weapons on each other. It was brilliant in theory. Vicky married the Crown Prince of Prussia. Alice went to Hesse. Alfred married into the Russian Romanovs. Helena chose a German prince. The others followed suit. By the 1880s, Victoria's children occupied thrones and palaces from London to St. Petersburg. Victoria became known as the grandmother of Europe, not metaphorically. Literally, her grandchildren included Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II's wife Alexandra, King George V of Britain, Queen Ina of Spain, Queen Marie of Romania. Christmas gatherings at Windsor looked like a United Nations summit. Victoria sat at the centre, this tiny woman in black, surrounded by the future rulers of the continent. She'd write letters to her grandchildren like any grandmother, except her family notes were essentially international diplomacy. One stern word from grandmama could shift European politics. The bloodlines created an intricate web. Every royal house connected to every other through Victoria's descendants. Marriage negotiations weren't just about love anymore. They were about maintaining the balance of power. Victoria's daughter Vicky became German Empress. Her son Bertie would rule Britain. Her granddaughter Alex married Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Another granddaughter, Ina, became Queen of Spain. The family tree looked like a map of Europe. Cousin George in London, Cousin Wilhelm in Berlin, Cousin Nicholas in St. Petersburg, all Victoria's blood, all supposedly united by family loyalty. But these marriages carried unexpected consequences. Take Vicky in Germany. She married Crown Prince Frederick, dreaming of creating a liberal, British-style constitutional monarchy. When Frederick died after ruling just 99 days, their son Wilhelm became Kaiser. And Wilhelm? He resented everything British about his mother, everything liberal about her influence. The boy who should have united Britain and Germany, instead, became one of his grandmother's greatest political nightmares. Victoria watched her own grandson turn into everything Albert had hoped to prevent. Family connections weren't guaranteeing peace. They were creating new tensions. Victoria genuinely believed family would prevent war. She'd arranged meetings between her grandson Kaiser Wilhelm and her son King Edward VII, hoping family dinners could solve international crises. She mediated disputes through letters, reminding monarchs they were cousins, not enemies. When tensions rose between Britain and Russia, she'd write to granddaughter Alex in St. Petersburg. When Germany and Britain clashed, she'd lecture Wilhelm about family loyalty. For years it seemed to work. European conflicts stayed small, localized. The grandmother's influence kept her grandchildren in line. Peace through bloodlines was actually working. Then came 1914. Everything Albert had dreamed, everything Victoria had built, collapsed in a matter of weeks. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination triggered mobilizations across Europe. But this wasn't strangers going to war. This was family. King George V of Britain found himself at war with his cousin Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Their other cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, commanded armies against both German and Austrian forces. Victoria's grandchildren were literally shooting at each other. The family Christmas photos from just years before now looked like war council meetings. The tragic irony was overwhelming. Victoria's peaceful dream of a united Europe had become a nightmare of family warfare. Wilhelm's submarines sank British ships. George's armies fought German forces. Nicholas's soldiers died in trenches facing Wilhelm's cousins. Letters between the royal cousins during the war are heartbreaking. They're still writing to each other as family, while their nations tear Europe apart. The very bloodlines meant to prevent war had instead mapped out the battle lines. Every front was a family feud on a continental scale. Albert's plan had backfired completely, but Victoria's genetic legacy carried another curse: hemophilia. She was a carrier, though she didn't know it. The gene passed randomly through her children. Leopold suffered terribly, constantly injured, constantly bleeding, living in protective isolation. Alice carried it and passed it to her daughter Alex. When Alex married Nicholas II and became Tsarina Alexandra of Russia, she brought hemophilia into the Romanov bloodline. Their son Tsarevich Alexei inherited the condition. Every bruise could be fatal. Every fall was potentially catastrophic. The heir to the Russian throne lived in constant medical crisis. Hemophilia's political impact was devastating. Alexandra's desperation to save Alexei led her to Rasputin, the mystic healer who seemed to help her son. Rasputin's influence over the royal family scandalized Russia, undermined the monarchy's reputation, and contributed to revolutionary sentiment. Victoria's genetic legacy helped bring down the Russian Empire. The condition spread through Spanish royalty too, creating instability there. A random genetic mutation in a British queen rippled forward through generations, toppling dynasties. Victoria's blood carried both crowns and curses, power and poison, across Europe's royal houses. Victoria died in 1901, never seeing how completely her family legacy would reshape history. Her children ruled or influenced every major European power. Her grandchildren fought the Great War. Her genes carried both hemophilia and hereditary monarchy across the continent. She'd become exactly what Albert envisioned, the matriarch of European royalty. But the Europe their descendants inherited wasn't the peaceful, unified continent Albert had dreamed of. It was fractured, violent, changed forever by the very family connections meant to preserve it. Victoria's legacy lived on, but in ways neither she nor Albert could have imagined. The Mourning Queen. December 14th, 1861. Windsor Castle. Prince Albert collapses during a brief walk. Fever, exhaustion, stomach pain, they call it typhoid fever. Victoria sits beside his bed for 13 days straight. She holds his hand, whispers German lullabies he sang to their children. On December 14th at 10:50 p.m, Albert takes his final breath. Victoria screams, a sound so raw the servants freeze outside the door. At 42 years old, she becomes a widow, and something inside her breaks permanently. That night she writes in her diary, "My life as a happy one is ended. The world is gone for me." She means it literally. Victoria orders every clock in Windsor Castle stopped at 10:50. Albert's room becomes a shrine. His clothes laid out daily, fresh water in his wash basin. Servants change his bed linens every morning, as if he might return. She sleeps clutching his nightshirt. This isn't just grief, it's devotion, so complete it borders on madness. 21 years together, now 40 years alone ahead. The black dress appears immediately. Victoria orders her entire wardrobe replaced with mourning clothes, not just for a year or two, for the rest of her life. Heavy black silk, white cap, long black veil, the same outfit every single day until she dies in 1901. 40 years of black. Her children beg her to add some colour. Maybe navy blue, deep purple. She refuses. Black means Albert is still with her. Colour would mean accepting he's gone, and Victoria will never accept that. She disappears from public view. The woman who once loved state ceremonies now hides at Windsor Castle. Parliament begs her to appear. Open buildings, meet foreign dignitaries, show herself to her people. Victoria says no. She'll do paperwork, read government reports, sign documents, but no ceremonies, no crowds, no public joy. How can she smile when Albert can't see it? The British press starts calling her the Widow of Windsor. Not exactly flattering, but she doesn't care what they think anymore. Meanwhile, she's building monuments, lots of them. The Albert Memorial in Hyde Park, 176 feet tall, covered in gold, cost £120,000. That's about 15 million today. The Royal Albert Hall across the street. Albert appears in stained glass, marble statues, bronze plaques all over London. She's literally carving his memory into the city. Each monument carries the same message. Albert existed. Albert mattered. Albert changed everything. And Victoria will make sure nobody forgets. The grief has purpose now. Preservation. She publishes his speeches, his letters, creates scholarships in his name. The Victoria and Albert Museum opens in 1852, but after his death, she expands it massively. Art, science, culture, everything Albert loved. She's building an empire of memory. Each institution proves Albert's ideas live on. His vision of education, culture, progress. Victoria becomes the guardian of his intellectual legacy. This isn't just mourning anymore, it's mission. Albert's ghost has work to do, and Victoria's the only one who can do it. But here's what gets heartbreaking. She starts talking to him, out loud, in public. Ministers arrive for meetings, and Victoria addresses an empty chair. Albert thinks we should consider this proposal. Albert would have wanted. Her children watch their mother have conversations with heir. The British government learns to work around a queen who consults her dead husband on policy decisions. It's touching and terrifying at the same time. Love doesn't end with death, but this is something else entirely. The loneliness becomes crushing. 9 children, but none of them can replace Albert's partnership. They try, especially Vicky, her eldest daughter, but Victoria pushes them away. They remind her too much of what she's lost. She surrounds herself with Albert's things instead. His walking stick, his favourite books, photo albums of their life together. She creates a museum of their marriage inside Windsor Castle. Every room holds evidence that once, briefly, she was completely happy. Years pass. The 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Victoria ages into the black-clad figure we picture when we think Victorian era. But she never moves past 1861. Emotionally, she's still that 42-year-old woman screaming beside Albert's deathbed. 40 years of technological progress, social change, imperial expansion. Victoria observes it all through the lens of perpetual loss. Every achievement feels hollow because Albert isn't there to share it. The empire grows, but the empress shrinks into her grief. People start wondering, is this healthy? Her own doctor calls the mourning morbid and unnatural. Critics say she's neglecting her royal duties. The monarchy's popularity plummets. Cartoons mock the widow of Windsor, who takes taxpayer money but won't show her face. Victoria doesn't care. Public opinion matters less than private devotion. She's not mourning for them. She's mourning for Albert, and Albert, she believes, is watching, approving, waiting. The love story isn't over. It's just paused. This is the paradox of Victoria's grief. It preserved Albert's legacy brilliantly while trapping her completely. The monuments still stand. The institutions still flourish. His ideas about education, culture, progress, they became the foundation of modern Britain. But Victoria herself never truly lived again after 1861. She existed, she endured, she remembered, but she didn't live. That's the price of love. This deep when it ends, part of you ends too. And Victoria chose never to let that part heal. Reflections of a Deep Love. So here we are, at the end of Victoria and Albert's story. And honestly, I keep thinking about how we reduce their relationship to simple terms. The perfect royal love story, the grieving widow in black. But that misses everything that made them extraordinary. Their love wasn't perfect. It was real. Messy, complicated, transformative. They fought like any couple, made sacrifices that hurt, built something together that outlasted both their lives. Tonight, let's reflect on what their partnership actually teaches us about love, sacrifice, and legacy. The thing about Victoria and Albert's love, it existed on multiple levels simultaneously. There was the teenage infatuation from that first meeting. Victoria writing about Albert's beautiful teeth, his sweet mouth, pure physical attraction. But then there was the intellectual partnership, Albert challenging Victoria's political instincts, Victoria defending Albert to skeptical ministers. They were lovers, yes, but also colleagues, collaborators, co-rulers in everything but name. That's rare. Most relationships exist primarily on one level. Theirs thrived on several, which made it incredibly strong and incredibly complicated when things went wrong. The sacrifices they made for each other were enormous. Victoria gave up her fierce independence. This woman who'd fought for an hour alone as queen, who'd resisted marriage for 3 years, she restructured her entire reign around Albert's partnership. Albert sacrificed even more. His homeland, his identity, any possibility of independent recognition. For 17 years he was just Prince Albert, never formally Prince Consort, never equal to Victoria in title, though equal in everything else. He chose love over status, partnership over power. That's not romantic fantasy. That's genuine sacrifice, and it shaped everything they accomplished together. They fought, you know, real fights, not polite royal disagreements. Victoria had a legendary temper. She'd throw things when angry. Albert would go cold, withdraw into work, refuse to engage until she calmed down. Their worst fight was over foreign policy in 1850. Victoria supported military intervention somewhere. Albert thought it was reckless. They didn't speak for days. Imagine that tension in a palace where everyone's watching, waiting to see which way power flows. But here's what made them work. They always came back to each other, always chose partnership over pride. Albert worked himself to death. Literally, by the late 1850s, he was handling Victoria's correspondence, redesigning government efficiency, planning the Great Exhibition, reforming university education, modernizing the military, plus being father to 9 children. Victoria would find him asleep at his desk at midnight, papers scattered everywhere. She begged him to slow down. He couldn't. He'd spent his life proving himself worthy of being Victoria's husband, worthy of Britain's acceptance. The relentless productivity that made him indispensable also killed him. Success became a trap he couldn't escape. But look what they built together. The Great Exhibition of 1851. Albert's vision brought to life by Victoria's support. 6 million visitors, profits that funded museums and colleges, still operating today. They reformed British education, modernised the monarchy's relationship with Parliament, created new standards for royal behaviour that emphasised duty and moral leadership. They weren't just figureheads, they were active partners in governing. Victoria provided legitimacy and political instinct. Albert brought systematic thinking and continental perspective. Together, they transformed how monarchy functioned in a democratic age. That partnership model influenced royal families worldwide. The traditions they created still shape our lives. White wedding dresses exist because Victoria chose white in 1840. Christmas trees became Western standard because people saw royal family portraits decorating theirs together. They popularised afternoon tea, made photography acceptable for documenting family life, established precedent for royal charitable patronage. These weren't accidental cultural shifts. They were conscious choices to make monarchy relatable, to show that royal families could model middle-class values like domestic happiness, education, hard work, moral behaviour. They essentially invented modern celebrity culture by making their private lives publicly inspirational. Their dynastic legacy is staggering. 9 children married into European royalty, creating connections across the continent. Victoria became grandmother of Europe. Her descendants included the Kaiser of Germany, the Tsar of Russia, the King of Britain, Queens of Spain and Romania. They'd hoped family ties would prevent European war. Instead, when World War I erupted, Victoria's grandchildren found themselves commanding opposing armies, cousins killing cousins. The family tree became a map of tragedy. Love couldn't overcome nationalism. Blood couldn't prevent bullets. Their greatest hope became their most painful legacy. Albert died December 14th, 1861. Typhoid fever, though modern doctors think it might have been cancer or kidney disease. Victoria held his hand as he slipped away, whispered his name over and over. She wrote that night, "My life as a happy one is ended. The world is gone for me." At 42, she felt her life was essentially over. This woman who'd been queen for 24 years, mother to 9 children, ruler of the largest empire in history, believed her story ended when Albert's did. That grief would define the next 4 decades of her reign, reshape the monarchy, change British culture forever. For 40 years, Victoria wore black, never completely recovered from Albert's death. She turned their shared bedroom into a shrine, kept his clothes laid out daily, had servants bring hot water for his morning shave decades after he died. Her grief became legendary, but also problematic. Britain needed their queen present, engaged. Victoria retreated from public life, ruled from Windsor Castle or Scottish Highlands. The monarchy survived because Albert had helped her build such strong institutional foundations. But her mourning showed both love's power and its potential to become destructive when it can't find healthy expression. What does their love story actually mean? It proves partnership transforms everything it touches. 2 awkward teenagers met at a birthday party, chose each other against political pressure, built something that outlasted both their lives. Their love created traditions we still follow, institutions still functioning, a model for modern monarchy that influenced the world. Was it perfect? No. They fought, struggled, made mistakes. Albert died too young, Victoria grieved too long. But it was real, it mattered, and nearly 2 centuries later, we're still talking about it. That's what genuine love can do. It echoes forward through time. Hands off, a monumental love. Here's something remarkable. Most love stories end when the people die. Victoria and Albert's love story, it just kept going. Right now, tonight, someone somewhere is putting on a white wedding dress because of Victoria. Someone else is decorating a Christmas tree because of Albert. Their love didn't just change them, it changed us. Everything from how we celebrate holidays to how we think about marriage, it all traces back to 2 awkward teenagers who met at a birthday party in 1836. Let's start with that wedding dress. February 10th, 1840. Victoria's dressmakers were horrified. White for a queen? Royal brides wore rich colours, red, purple, gold. Something that showed wealth and power, but Victoria wanted simplicity. She wanted to marry Albert as a woman, not a political spectacle. That white silk satin dress, trimmed with orange blossoms, it was a revolution wrapped in simplicity. Within months, middle-class women across Britain were requesting white wedding dresses. A personal choice became a global tradition. Then there's Christmas. Before Victoria and Albert, Christmas trees were this obscure German tradition. Nice, but not exactly widespread. Then in 1848, the Illustrated London News published an image. The royal family gathered around their Christmas tree, Victoria and Albert with their children, decorating branches together like any normal family. Suddenly, everyone wanted a tree. By the 1860s, Christmas trees were everywhere. A simple family moment, captured and shared, transformed an entire holiday. That's the power of authentic love. It makes everything it touches more beautiful. They were obsessed with photography, commissioning hundreds of portraits. This was revolutionary. For centuries, people only saw their monarchs through formal painted portraits, distant, idealized, untouchable. Victoria and Albert changed that. Suddenly, ordinary people could see what their queen actually looked like at home, playing with her children, sitting next to her husband. They looked normal, happy, like any family you might know. Photography made monarchy human. They invented the modern royal family, powerful but relatable, formal but somehow accessible. Before Victoria and Albert, royalty was about power and scandal. After them, it became about virtue and family values. They showed that monarchs could be both powerful and moral, setting examples worth following. The middle class saw their own values reflected: hard work, education for children, faithful partnership, domestic happiness. Victoria and Albert didn't just rule Britain, they gave the emerging middle class a blueprint for respectability. Marriage became partnership, parenthood became intentional, home became sacred. They transformed monarchy into something aspirational, rather than just hereditary. Their 9 children married into royal houses across Europe. Victoria became the grandmother of Europe. By 1914, most European monarchs were her descendants. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsarina Alexandra of Russia, all Victoria's grandchildren. They'd hoped family connections would prevent war. Instead, when World War I erupted, Victoria's grandchildren found themselves on opposite sides, cousins leading nations into a conflict that killed millions. The family tree had become a map of war. Love's legacy isn't always what you expect. And there was hemophilia. Victoria was a carrier, passing this genetic condition to several children who spread it through European royalty. Tsarevich Alexei of Russia inherited it. His mother Alexandra, desperate to help him, fell under Rasputin's influence. This contributed to the royal family's unpopularity and ultimately the Russian Revolution. A random genetic mutation rippled forward through Victoria's bloodline to help bring down an empire. Love creates legacies, but not all legacies are blessings. Sometimes they're just consequences echoing through time. After Albert died in 1861, Victoria entered 40 years of mourning. 40 years. She wore black for the rest of her life, kept his room exactly as he'd left it, had his clothes laid out every morning. Some called it devotion, others called it pathological. Maybe it was both. Her grief became a monument to their love, but it also trapped her. She withdrew from public life when her people needed her most. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and Victoria never found a healthy place for all that love. But here's what gets me about their story. It proves that love, when allowed to flourish, changes everything it touches. It changed 2 awkward teenagers into confident partners. It transformed British monarchy from scandal-ridden institution into moral example. It created fashion traditions, shaped holiday celebrations, built museums and monuments, still standing today. Their love left a mark on history, visible almost 200 years later. That's what real partnership can do. Ripple outward through time, touching lives they never knew existed. Was their love perfect? No. They fought, struggled, made mistakes. Albert worked himself to death. Victoria's grief became consuming. Their descendants went to war against each other. But it was real, it mattered, and it changed the world. Maybe that's what we're all hoping for. Not perfection, but meaning. Not a flawless fairy tale, but genuine connection that proves we were here, we loved, and that love meant something. Victoria and Albert had that. Despite everything, complications, tragedy, loss, they created something that literally never died. So as you drift off tonight, remember this: you don't have to be royalty to matter. You just have to love deeply, choose wisely, commit fully. Let that love ripple outward into the world. Victoria and Albert started with a dance at a birthday party and ended up changing how we celebrate weddings and Christmas. Your story matters too. Your love, however ordinary it feels, has power to echo through time. Sleep well, knowing that every act of genuine love adds something beautiful to the world. Sweet dreams,